Illari is the lowest picked support hero according to Overbuff, and it's so bad that even in Masters, Lifeweaver has a higher pick rate. So what's happened? Well, she's only been in the game for about a year and a half, but the second she dropped, she caused a massive disruption in the current meta. At the time, Sombra Tracer Dive was the default comp, but a sleuth of nerfs over the months that led up to the release of Illari basically killed that hard dive meta. And believe me, Illari was super broken on release, probably to make up for how underwhelming Lifeweaver was. She basically got insta-nerfed a week later, and coupled with teams not really understanding the Illari comp yet, the only team to play the hero was Toronto Defiance, who did have the benched GOAT himself, Sir Majed. Fast forward 2 months though, and Saudi Arabia had not only just won, but reverse swept China at the Overwatch World Cup. And of course, they did so playing Illari. Since then, her pro play presence has been fairly quiet. That is partially due to the introduction of characters like Malga, who was so broken that it genuinely sparked a serious conversation about Overwatch being pay to win. However, she got a ton of micro buffs at the start of this year. In January, she was able to charge her shot while beaming, combined with an ammo increase, removed fall off on Captive Sun, and a refilled secondary resource meter. Next month, her pylon got a 2-second and 3-second cooldown buff, her Captive Sun got a damage increase with a small bit of fall off. In March, the recovery time between her shots got reduced by a third, and the time it took to get a full charge on her shots also got reduced, which did increase her DPS. In April, the primary fire recovery time got partially reverted, but the HPS on her beam got increased to 115. In June, her outburst got buffed, and her pylon got partially buffed with a small HP increase, as well as having an increased healing rate for teammates. Obviously, for Illari herself, the healing got reduced by 10 points overall. In July, her pylon cooldown got nerfed, and Captive Sun got a 12% increase in ult cost. This is when the nerfs start to hit, as in August, her max ammo got reduced back to 14, and her damage got nerfed both in terms of the maximum and minimum numbers. There was this viral clip back in August showing how Illari outdamaged Cassidy at distance, but obviously this greatly oversimplified Illari's strengths, which may have caused this unnecessary nerf. We also can't forget the DPS passive, and because of Illari's design, being a support that basically functioned as a DPS, she would always be at a disadvantage when dueling DPS. Of course, this also greatly nerfed Illari's pylon. It is worth noting that despite the ups and downs, teams did still play Illari. Gala for Virtus Pro was probably the best Illari in EU, but of course, Sir Majed still played it for Falcons, alongside Vega for Toronto Ultra during the Esports World Cup. However, it wouldn't take long for the curse of Juno to hit Illari so hard that I can't find a single pro game of Illari past the Esports World Cup, which does give me a nice segue into the next section. To put it simply, Illari does not play well with or against Juno, who is so broken that she is basically the central piece to 99% of comps nowadays. Now to be clear, before Juno existed, Illari was still being played on maps that suited her, typically long, open sightlines with tons of distance to swing wide and take angles. Think Busan Sanctuary, Blizzard World, or Circuit Royale. But the second Juno dropped, it basically killed her ability to be played on those maps.
So what happens? The Juno uses the Hyper Ring, the D.Va goes through the Hyper Ring and goes flying into the backline. So if you're just playing like a Bap, Illari, or Sigma type thing, the D.Va will just go flying past, your Bap, Illari will put under serious pressure, especially on nano timings, and the Sigma can't do all that much about it.
But arguably, that entire meta was down to a bug to do with D.Va's multiplication. And after that was fixed, Illari just still isn't being played. So clearly, there's more to the story. There is also the fact that flankers at the moment are very good at contesting Illari's angle. We've seen that Illari loves to swing wide, ideally with another hit scan, but a ton of heroes at the moment are very good at contesting Illari. Genji is very good at pouncing on Illari's angle, and if he doesn't blow her up, he pretty much forces the Illari off the angle every single time. The exact same can be said with Reaper, who's had insane sustain since Season 9, and I already have some top level Reaper analysis from last month. Not to mention, both of these heroes also synergize well with Juno, because the speed obviously allows them to close that distance, and they also synergize well with Brig, who can send packs to give support, and allow them to not just take Illari's angle, but also hold it. Because of this, If you're going to play Illari, you're forced to stack down main, and as Coach Cuffy, infamous tier 2 twink, stated to me in DMs, if you're gonna have Illari stay down main, you might as well pick Zen. And funnily enough, we have seen Zen Juno being played because the Discord puts infinitely more pressure on the tank than whatever pressure Illari puts out. Team Gambit played Zen back in Stage 4, and even Toronto Defiant played Zen in the recent Stockholm tournaments. If you can't swing wide as Illari because flankers pressure you out, then you might as well play Zen. So that's why Illari isn't that great against the Juno Reaper Genji comps that we've been seeing, at least for the moment. But that doesn't fully explain why we don't see Illari with Juno, which is for 3 main reasons. Firstly, Juno will just die every single time. It's why Brig Juno is so prevalent at the moment, because everything else about Juno is so good that you kind of need another support that just keeps her alive. Illari just doesn't do that very well. Sure, she does have a high burst heal beam, but Illari should usually be playing on a separate angle, and as I just explained in section 3, that's not always possible. Secondly, her ultimate is worse than Brig's. Not saying that Captive Sun is bad, it just isn't Rally. And thirdly, Illari and Juno are anti-synergistic. Juno's severe falloff, coupled with her hypering, all encourage her to enable her team to close the distance, whereas conversely, Illari does not want to be up close against the Mauga Echo Reaper stuff that we've been recently seeing. To put it very simply, one character wants to generally play at distance, whereas the other character generally doesn't. Now I want to take a look at whether the general player base are to blame for some of Illari's downfall.
But before I go, I just want to get this off my chest. That shit was not my fault. Y'all are trash. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart. Y'all are trash.
The skill floor for Illari for the average player is so high that it makes Ryan Force look tiny. The value for Illari, the reason why you play her, is for that insane damage output and just being a stat monkey in general. However, you need to actually be able to aim to get that damage value consistently. And while you might argue that the healing pylon is very easy to get value out of, which I don't disagree with, lower level players often forget to reposition the pylon and or place it with cover, which ends up in players feeling like the pylon isn't always doing much. It's not a coincidence that Illari's pick rate slowly increases the more you go up the ranks. From 0.75% in Bronze to 1.36% in Grandmaster. Just a quick coaching plug before I continue. If you want to get the best value coaching on the market, click the top link in the description. We also need to acknowledge that Illari was never hard meta. If you want to get technical, she kinda was on release, but I mean in terms of pro play. The only time we've seen a top level team play Illari was Saudi Arabia, and even those fuckers were forced to match the Lucio on maps where playing Illari was a more Herculean task than me trying to smile in photos. Illari's pick rate has been cut in half if you check the last 6 months compared to now, but she was never a top support to begin with. Even in the ranks that people actually play Illari in, and being charitable to her pick rate in the last 6 months, she's still bottom 3 supports. Illari hates swinging tight corners with not a lot of distance to work with, or playing angles that give bad sightlines. It certainly doesn't help that the 2 most recent modes that were added to Overwatch, being Flashpoint and Clash, play to Illari's biggest weaknesses. Don't get me wrong, there are some good Illari points, like the open area on New Junk City, or even the very long sightline on Suravasa First, but this is more the exception than the rule. Now this would usually be the section of the video where I analyse some recent, relevant, high-level play from the character that's being talked about in the video, but Illari has really outdone herself. I cannot find a single map from any team that has played Illari ever since Juno got introduced. To be fair, ML7 did make a video on Illari recently, but the games he played barely featured Juno, nor did they feature many flankers, let alone competent ones, and of course, he's playing in ranked. A significantly more chaotic environment than team play. Thankfully though, the solutions to fixing Illari are actually pretty straightforward in my opinion. Nerf Juno as a good start, and revert the nerfs to Illari that affect her ability to hold angles. Only getting 20 healing per second on an angle just isn't enough in my opinion, especially with that DPS passive. So I would just revert the pylon back to a flat 30 healing per second. The damage nerf was also unnecessary, considering that it was probably just a response to a clip that required more nuance, so I would revert that too. Well, that's it for the video. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like, and as always, let me know your thoughts down below. Until next time.